food bank processes in our communities. We did it quickly, we did it by broadening our reach, and we did it by addressing challenges that were put at us from different directions every day. I liken the fact that oftentimes people say to me, wow, 2020 was a great year for the Alaska Community Foundation. And I always kind of come back and say, Alaska 2020 was a great year for all 11 community foundations across our state, period, the end, because we couldn't have done any of this collectively without each other. And so it does bring us back to the idea of family that Erin mentioned, which is exactly why I'm excited about the next 2 days, because I believe the next 2 days we have a chance to reconnect with each other, to share ideas, and to learn and grow together, so we can even have a stronger vision for where we're going in the future. And I would like to propose that everybody on this phone call, the affiliate board members, the affiliate program staff, ACF staff, ACF board members, that we're all in this together for the next 2 days, that there are no bad ideas, there are no silly questions, there is just a room to think in a safe space, to think creatively, to think innovatively, and to think about how we can continue to grow the role and impact that we have in our community. So I would say, again, a huge appreciation to all of our panelists and facilitators who've joined us. We have some of the leaders from national foundations. We have professors of economics here in Alaska. We have leaders from other community foundations across the United States. We have community foundations on the phone. And then we have all of you who are going to bring great insight, great thoughtfulness, and great ingenuity to the next 2 days. So I look forward to working with you as we go through the next 2 days. I am going to close there and hand it so we can spend as much time talking about our ideas and thoughts for the next 5, 10, 20 years. And so I am going to hand it over to Marco, who will introduce our first facilitator for the day.
All right. Well, we have the great pleasure of having Janet Topolsky with us today. She's the Executive Director of the Community Strategies Group for the Aspen Institute. Some of you who were with us in 2012 probably remember Janet. She came up here October convening, and she inspired us talking about our essential roles in grant making, fundraising, and community leadership. And so we're really excited to have Janet with us today to talk to all of you. Janet, take it away.
That's it? I can start now? Hi, everybody. Janet Topolsky here. I'm in, if you want to know where I am, I'm sitting in Washington, D.C., a mile north of the White House. The air conditioning is on and it's 80 some degrees. All right. I'm just sort of saying that. But I also want to say to you that the first time I ever came to Alaska was to help the Community Foundation. It was before that meeting, I think. And you all had me come visit at the end of January. And I will tell you, you know, like, am I up for it or what? But I prefer the weather in Alaska at the end of January to what I have today. I'm just letting you know that. So I'm delighted to be with you virtually. I'm simply jealous that I can't be there with you in person. So what we're going to talk about for the next hour and 45 minutes or so is community foundations and community affiliates meeting the current needs of their community, and where are you at and what more might you do. So I'm going to actually share my screen. Always a frightening thing. Will it work or won't it? All right, is it working, everybody? Can you tell me? Have you got it?
Yep.
Yay, the excitement is mounting. So I'm calling this From Here to Boulder, the promise and opportunity of community development philanthropy, not just community philanthropy, but community development philanthropy. So there are 4 things I want to do in this next little bit of time, not just with me, but with some other wonderful speakers and experts we have here and Community Foundation colleagues elsewhere, to give you just a little context about community philanthropy, because I'm well aware that especially board members of advisory community members often don't really know the history of community foundations or that you're part of a movement. So just a little, or what the trends or the challenges are in the work that you do. So I want to talk about a little bit about that. I want to talk about the difference that community development philanthropy, when you get that headset on, can make, if that's the focus you have when you're thinking about the work of your community affiliate. I'm going to tell a few short stories. And ideally, what we want to do at this opening session is to sort of activate a discussion amongst yourselves as a whole group, but thinking about your own affiliate as well, about what success looks like for your community affiliate now and 5 years from now and maybe beyond that. So I'm going to jump right in. There's a point I'm going to stop and ask you all to think about something. So just be ready for that. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is just give you a small bit of context, right? And the context, thing one, you can think Dr. Seuss, thing one and thing two here, is that you are part of a strong and growing movement. Now, I will tell you that not many people have done surveys of the nation in terms of how many community foundations there are and how many community affiliates there are. We did 2 of those in quite some while back, I think 2005 and 2008. And I just want to show you, just to give you a sense of how many community foundations there were worldwide in 1988 versus 2008, and the increase in just 20 years of 400%. How many were outside the US? In 88, there were only 50. In 2008, there were nearly 751 countries. And look at that increase, 1,200%. In terms of the US, in 1988, there were, I don't know, around 300, 2008, 750 to 850. It's hard to keep a count on this that's really accurate. And so maybe Natalie will have that for us, but you can see what the increase was. Those were just all individual freestanding community foundations, like the Alaska Community Foundations. Affiliates would not have been counted in that. But we also asked about the number of affiliates in that same 20-year period, and you will see that growth was a 227% increase in just 10 years. In just 10 years. And there have been jillions more since then. How many of you were not even existing in 2008? How many of you are affiliates? So you have some sense that you are really part of a growing movement, and it's a movement that's making a difference in this country. Context 2 is that growing affiliates in serving smaller communities is different, and it's got its own set of challenges, and so is sustaining that. Now, why is it different? So I'm going to suggest that, especially I've worked in every state of the nation, and 75% of the work that I do is in rural and smaller towns, areas across the US, is that, you've got lower density, so there are fewer people that you can raise money from, and it takes longer to get to them. There are a smaller number of organizations doing things quite often in rural places or smaller town places. And if you're working in a region, you often have many small towns and jurisdictions. They may not have tax bases. There's no structure that helps them work together. So there's no governing body for a natural region. Like, I'm from Michigan originally, and in the Lower Peninsula, we have this area called the Thumb. There are a lot of people who say, I'm from the Thumb, because they have so much in common, challenges and opportunities. But there's no government of the Thumb. There's no one who can act on the Thumb's behalf or raise funds on the Thumb's behalf, or a structure within which they can work together. So, you're working in regions like that have many small jurisdictions, and everyone knows each other or thinks they do. So the reason I think it's different for a community affiliate that's in a smaller region is you can be a very big fish in that local pond, and you can also make a bigger difference because of that. So because of the way you are and what you can do, and we'll get to that later. I also think that it's a little different on how do you get, do people in a lot of smaller and rural places get what endowment is, or the potential for philanthropy. Now, it can be hard to get started. You already have, so you're way ahead of the game of that. But there tends to be less knowledge of endowed funds, of planned giving. And when people hear the word philanthropy, they often think, well, that's not about me. That's what rich people do. Rich people do philanthropy. I don't do it. But The other thing about growing endowment in smaller places is resources tend to be held differently than in urban. More of it's in land. There are lots of people who are land rich and cash poor. How do you turn that into endowment? The average gift is smaller. You really need to engage a lot more people in order to succeed, and that you tend to use more traditional fundraising. This is not a bad thing, but there's also an opportunity in that, and that opportunity is that everyone can be a philanthropist. It isn't just the rich people who do philanthropy. We all do philanthropy. It can be our community foundation. And one of the ways I like to think about that when people talk about building endowment, and I'm focusing only on the financial assets right now, we'll get to your other assets a little later. But if you think about traditional endowment building, a lot of people say, well, the way to do it is get a few really planned gift or large givers, start there, and then go one tier down to capital donors and then major gift donors. And then at the very bottom, your lowest priority is everybody, right? And I think in small and rural places, you turn that upside down and you turn endowment building into community building. And this is the difference we've seen in smaller and rural places across the US that are succeeding at this, is they start with the universe of prospects. They try to get as many people as possible at the front end to give no matter what amount, because the research is there. The people most likely to give to you tomorrow are the people who've already given to you. It's not brand new people. So the more people you have on board as having thought you were of value to give to, the better. And actually, the planned gifts come later. If a new organization comes to me and they ask me for a planned gift, I'm going to say, who are you? Right? But if I've been giving to them for years and they're doing good things in the community, then I think about them in my estate planning. It's not that I think you shouldn't be doing the planned giving. You should, but don't stop there and don't necessarily start there, only there, right? So that's another difference that we've really seen across the country with smaller community, smaller town, smaller city, and rural places. The third context thing I want to share is it's harder to use your assets to create community change than it is to grow your financial assets. I mean, you all think endowment is hard enough, then how do you use it to make a difference in your community? That's a tough thing. And, we talked about this years ago when we started talking about this. We said, endowment for what? What are we growing the endowment for, right? And community affiliate leaders want to make change happen, but how? And once again, it's tough enough when you have staff, but a lot of community affiliates only have small staffs or no staff. Around the country, there are lots of affiliates with no staff at all and no operating endowment. You guys are ahead of the game because you've got some operating endowment and you have some staff to help you. And that's a really big, important thing. There aren't that many affiliates in that position. There are in some states, but in some regions, but not in all of them. So you've got a learning curve, not just around endowment building and grant making, but all the other things that you can do: convene, leverage, understand what's important in your community. So there's a lot. So with that, I want you all to stop and think. I know this last year has been very different, and Nina already referred to that because of the COVID money that came your way and what you had to do. But I know before that, some of you were doing some pretty amazing things, some nice and good things and some amazing things. I want you to think for a minute, what feels like the most creative or the most courageous thing your affiliate has done or done differently in taking on a specific effort or initiative or grant or issue over the last year? I just want you to take a minute and think, and then I'm actually going to do a roll call of your affiliates, and I just want one person from that affiliate to jump in, unmute yourself, jump in, and tell us your answer to this question. Ready? Okay. Golden Heart. Who wants to tell us something courageous or creative or that you've done differently over the last year? Something you never thought you would do. And now all of a sudden who from Golden Heart will jump in?
I can jump in. This is Sally Keeper from Golden Heart in Fairbanks. The first thing that came to mind was that we had to cancel our annual in-person event. And so we took on doing a special edition newsletter, like an 8-page newsletter. And our board members got really creative with, so our annual event the last few years has been held at the Antique Auto Museum. And the whole newsletter followed that theme of the antique autos, using pictures of the antique autos, referring to, things like, the event was stalled due to a collision with COVID, et cetera, et cetera. So we played upon that theme. And then, we sure hope to be back at the Auto Museum in 2021.
And how'd you do?
The newsletter turned out really nicely, and we received a lot of good feedback on it. That people
Good.
like Aaron was saying, people took the time to read it.
Good. Jessica Stevens, Community Foundation.
Will Peterson here. I'm not sure that this was courageous. I think we kind of had no choice. We were, I'm not sure, Janet, if you're familiar with the Rasmussen Challenge that all of us affiliates had, but for the entire term of Jessica Stevens, we've kind of ignored legacy giving. And last year, in order to meet the challenge that Rasmussen put to us, we were not going to raise it in dollar bills and $25 here and $50 there. So we basically had to go and ask the uncomfortable question, start an uncomfortable conversation about, people's estates. What, will you consider us? And I think that kind of moved most of us out of our comfort zone. But again, I don't know that it was courageous.
I think it's courageous. I think it's courageous. I've worked with a lot of community foundation boards that would never do that. And some of them would say, okay, we're going to start doing it, but we're going to do it with a buddy system. So 2 of us do it together at the same time. Don't leave it one-on-one. So I think it is. So as I said, I'm not against getting estate gifts, but it is sort of a courageous thing to begin doing that. Okay.
Well, maybe the courageous part was we really had no idea what we were doing.
Yeah. Don't ask for permission, ask forgiveness. There you go. Chilkat Valley.
I can do that. This is Liz Haywood with Chilkat Valley. Back on December 2nd, the Chilkat Valley had a devastating storm event where we had loss of lives, property, over 40 families displaced from their homes. A week after the event, I called Nina up, and in one day time, we were able to go from the first discussion to having it live, a non-endowed emergency response fund that we can use for the immediate needs back in December, but also long-term recovery efforts. And we've gotten $140,000 in donations for that and are very much active. The CVCF is in long-term recovery efforts. So
that's terrific. And just think, had you not been there, how would that have happened?
Had ACF not been there to help us make it happen. And to do it in half a day's time was remarkable.
Thank you. Seward.
I'll jump in. Like everyone, the whole COVID shutdown hit right in the middle of our major grant decision-making process. So we switched gears really quickly right in the middle of that and created a whole third way of dispersing funds. So in the past, we've had a really great mini grant program and then a one major grant program a year. And we took a bunch of money out of our major grants and set it up for discretionary grants. And was able to really stand beside a lot of our important groups in the community. The senior center wound up having huge expenses because they're winding up stockpiling a lot more food, switching to delivery. The Boys and Girls Club was handling food in the for the schools and the kids that were distance learning. And so basically creating a whole different funding stream out into the community. We really didn't change our endowment fundraising model that much. We kept trying to get the Pick, Click, Give, the $5 and $10, as well as we got a couple of decent legacy grants, thanks to the encouragement from the Foraker match was a good encouragement for that.
Great. So you realized you could do your grant making a little differently to meet the times. Kenai Peninsula?
This is Hadassah. I'm from the Kenai Peninsula Foundation. Hey, so one of the things with COVID and everything, we were kind of right in the middle of our competitive grant cycle. So we finished that up and really kind of focused on a lot of nonprofits that would that we could support, what they were going through. And so our board became really creative on how we could support them better. And we're able to just kind of think outside of the box and really take into consideration what we were seeing coming in, and I think be a little bit more open-minded about some of those things that the community was needing. So that was one of the things. And then, and it's not quite on like the fundraising side, but our board had recently gone through a lot of changes, and we had lost some board members and just people, moving in places. And so that was kind of a challenge for this last year. But then with COVID, it was kind of a blessing, because with COVID, it allowed actually some of our board members that weren't able to actually participate in person to those board meetings to be able to come back and be able to participate via Zoom. And so that was another really great way that we were able to be creative this year. So
Great. So one thing that you think was creative, or that you felt was most creative or courageous or different? Kodiak?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Brianna Cooper. I'm program manager for Kodiak. And I think this year was a really reflective year for the Kodiak Community Foundation. Typically, we've sat pretty cozy at a 6 to 7 member board. And when COVID hit and there were a lot of ideas circling, it was realizing that we were maxing out the capacity of our board. And so maybe there was more we could do for our community, but we couldn't do it with the board numbers we had. So we reached out significantly, and we're really excited to share that we've onboarded 3 new board members this year since the onset of COVID, and we actually just had a 4th accept to join. So we're really excited to have grown our capacity, and we look forward to trying to be more courageous in the years ahead.
Terrific. Petersburg?
I can jump in. Liz Cabrera, Petersburg Community Foundation. I think this year with COVID, it really brought to light some flaws in our safety net, particularly in the area of childcare. Always been an issue in our community, but the last year really made it more of a crisis. It was the first time I think we stepped out into more of a convening and advocacy role for the Community Foundation. Through our program manager, brought together different organizations in town, presented solution to the Borough Assembly for funding, and that moved forward. So that was a big success for us. And now we're seeing kind of the next step, which is some momentum within the community itself to bring this issue forward and actually address it in a more long-term way. And that's coming from different nonprofit organizations. And so that's been really rewarding, and we're trying to support that effort as well.
Yeah, that's a big issue across the country right now too. That was Sitka. Sitka next.
Hello and thank you. This is Molly Kabler from the Sitka group. And we did a couple of things. We stopped to think about needs in our community instead of just fundraising. I mean, we've always been fundraising and working to do some some granting, but we really wanted to step back and take a look at what were the needs and how are the needs changing under this COVID pandemic. So we did a couple of community convenings of nonprofit leaders to find out what they needed and how we could be helpful. And that went very well. And then the other thing is a sort of through that role and also having our program manager participate in processes on behalf of those nonprofits in our community, we ended up doing a City Cares granting process ourselves. The city asked us to participate and we developed a system, and that led to local CARES funding going to Sitka nonprofits to the tune of $672,500. So we really did a lot of work that might have been a little bit outside the scope of what we'd done in the past, but felt appropriate. And we really were thankful to help Sitkans and Sitka nonprofits in particular through admin work, essentially.
But now you know you can do that. You can handle that volume, right? Which
Yeah.
you probably wouldn't have thought of the year before. Palmer?
Hi, my name is Penny Champney, and I'm the vice chair for Palmer Community Foundation. And so this year, obviously, we've been doing virtual meetings, and we've had maximum participation from our board. We've also onboarded 2 new board members, so we're growing, and we're very thankful for that. So one of the things that we did was we sent out a survey to the community to see what our community members felt that the community needed. And this year felt a little bit different because we were able to actually reach out and touch some communities or touch some of the organizations to ask them what they needed and to customize what we did and what we granted out for those organizations. So it felt like we were looking for more meaningful and more impactful ways to touch our community. And so COVID's been a really busy time for all of us. And so we feel like we've been able to touch our community in more meaningful ways because we haven't had the luxury of doing in-person events, but we've also taken that time to learn and to train and to bring in some speakers and to learn about legacy giving. So we're hopeful and very ready for the next year and hope we can do bigger things this year because we've had the time to prep when we normally would be doing other things. So we feel very close to our community at this point.
Terrific. Cordova?
Hi, I'm Gail from Cordova. We're the baby affiliate, I believe, in the state, and I came on just about 8 months ago, and the COVID hit us when we were like a 1-year-old, a toddler. So due to the amazing work of our board, however, we already had $1 million donation being paid in over 5 years. So the board chose to keep that under their hat, and they worked with the donor to create a matching opportunity, and it was announced in our newsletter that went to all the box holders in Cordova and into the Cordova Times, which probably actually had a bigger effect in March, so just a month ago. And suddenly I've had to start checking our email or our post office box, and the checks are rolling in without an official ask. But this action that they took with this amazing anonymous donor helped CCF gain traction in our community and credibility in our community. And we're just really pleased to see that starting to happen, and we're learning what we can do to help Cordova. Really excited for what we can learn today.
That's so great. Did I get everybody? I think I did.
Janet, if I could, this is Tim Navarre from the Kenai Peninsula Foundation. And I just wanted to real quick, I like the idea. I think our foundation is your pyramid turned upside down. That's how we've always operated. I think our courageous ways is, even though we didn't have a lot of money in the early days and still growing, but we gave these small community grants out to number ones, and even reaching out to them and educating them on who we were and what we're able to do if people give, is building that part of that foundation that helps us. And then now we've always been focused on homelessness, and that we had an anonymous donation in December of 10,000, and then another one at 20, and now I believe it's up to 30,000. And just the other day, I got personal phone calls of people saying, exactly where do I give? Because there was a news piece that came out. And so all those things help. And even though that's a dedicated fund to the homeless that our affiliates started and made possible, but it's those small things that I think build our foundation. And I think even though we're slow and growing, but we're building a strong foundation, I believe, and I think that's important. So thank you for that one slide. And
terrific. It's wonderful to hear from all of you. Of course, that's making me run over time already, but that's neither here nor there. We're going to go through. I think it's actually really important to hear from each other about what you're doing and how different, how things are different and what you realized that you could do last year, because that really sets you up for what you're going to do next, right? And it takes the blinders off about what's possible. So I want to talk about, just for a while, about thinking about what you're doing from a community development philanthropy lens, rather than just community philanthropy. And you know, this occurred to a lot of us who were working with rural or smaller town community foundations about 15 years ago, that we saw these affiliates and these smaller foundations in smaller areas, really because they were that bigger fish in a smaller pond. And because they might not have an organization that could bring communities together, that could be a government or it could be a place that communities could act together, that they really were blending a lot of their work with community and economic development. And they could be transformative. And here is the way we think about transformative. You know, let's say you've got a community with hungry children and families. And a traditional community foundation, you know, 30 years ago, sleepy foundations, what they would do in that case was to feed people by supporting or setting up a food pantry. And that is a very good thing to do. Basic needs should always be taken care of. The problem is hungry people today are going to be hungry people tomorrow unless something changes in their situation. So it's a good thing, but if you want to go upstream, right, you have to think about, well, why do the parents not have enough money in that family? And what can we do to change the situation for those parents? Do they not have a car to get them to work? Are they not pulling down all the benefits they could? Could they use training and assistance to get a job or a better job? And that's curing the disease. That's a better thing to do. And then even better, transformative, is to make sure that the community has enough good jobs to employ all the parents in the community. And I think that what we've learned over time is that when you think strategically as a community foundation and what you're going to do for the community, you want to move in this direction. I think option 2 and option 3 are more transformative than option 1. So is that the way you're thinking? Certainly not all your grant making or all your activity, everything you do can be focused on that, because there are basic needs, but there are other things you can do, right? So the question is, the gut moment that a lot of us had was, it's not just about the money. It's how can you as a community foundation bring more people and leaders together to make decisions together about the community? How can you build knowledge and skills about what's true in the community as opposed to what people think is true? How can you strengthen or create local organizations that are needed? And really increasingly more important is, how can you honor and channel diverse voices and community giving traditions into your strategies so that they have more impact? So you really are our community's foundation, not that thing that some people in the community do. In other words, can you change the future of your place, or how can you do that? How can you use resources? I just want to tell a few simple stories. So these are all true stories. So there was a community affiliate in Minnesota that lost its medical service. A health corporation in the Twin Cities bought the local clinic and then closed it. They bought the practice, and unbeknownst to the community, they then decided to close it because the facility was outdated. And the traditional way of thinking about what will we do as a community affiliate in this situation is you would make grants to help low-income people or transportation challenged people get to medical services in another community. But what this board did, no staff, what this board did is they went and they negotiated with the corporate medical center that had bought their facility and said, donate the clinic building to us. You closed it, at least donate it to us. And they did. And then they went out and they found a doctor and a dentist. Before, they only had a doctor a few days a week. They found a doctor and a dentist who were willing to come into the community once or twice a week, but only if the facility got upgraded. So they used some of their money then to upgrade the facility. And the doctor and dentist started coming. The dentist ultimately bought the building and the community got the money back. So this was a full circle thing, and they changed their community because of that. They kept medical service in the community. The affiliate fund that did this was the Chocaya Area Community Fund in Chocaya, Minnesota, and you were looking at an aerial view of the entire town right there, right? Here's another story. There's an economically distressed county in West Virginia, and there was no money for youth development. So they could have made some small grants to help some organizations stay afloat or had their donors give to them. But instead, they built a whole community participation process. And what they did is they got every business or some small businesses to adopt some of the youth development organizations. And then they gave them a challenge to raise money together. So these businesses adopted a youth development group. They worked together. All the staff of the business got to know that youth development group. They raised this money. They put all the money in a fund. The businesses matched the funds. And then the foundation used the funds to do grant making to the youth groups. And on top of that, they built a lot of knowledge in the community about the youth groups, and all those business people who volunteered began to love that youth development group, and they started giving them directly. So this is a way to build a lot of capacity and a lot of interest and a lot of relationships that are critical to community building. That was a Mason County Community Foundation in West Virginia. Here's another one that I love in Hillsdale, Michigan, town of 8,200. They had a bunch of local employers that had no one with the skills they needed. That they could hire locally. And they had a lot of young people who wanted to work and were willing to work, but there were no skills training for the jobs that those employers were hiring for locally. There was state funding that the local school district could have pulled down, but the local school district was being sleepy and wouldn't act. So what this foundation did, they partnered with the local college to create a pilot program. They got 24 high school juniors to do the program and get college credit while they were doing it. It was all related to welding, energy, and manufacturing. There was a 100% pass rate, and they were getting hired as soon as they were graduating at the first round. But if the foundation hadn't put that partnership together with a local college, it wouldn't have happened. Later on, someone new came in and ran the school district, and they took it over. So the foundation didn't have to do it in perpetuity. But it was their thinking about what gap can we fill to make this happen, to change the future of our community. So really, and this is from the board chair of a foundation in Wisconsin, the most important thing you can learn is how to empower the voices in your community. And that means really listening. What they really did was listen to what the situation was and then act within their capacity to do that. So we're really talking about how can you deliver on 4 outcomes. What is your vision as a community affiliate for how you can help people do better, how you can maintain and build culture and the relationships within that culture, how can you maintain and build your natural and built resources, and what can you do to improve the economy? So you really want to be thinking about, are we producing results that matter to our future? I mean, buying uniforms to the band is important, but it may not change the future of your community, right? Are you forging and fortifying connections and control and leadership? Are you leveraging and building every asset? So what this suggests is that you need to think about, what are the measures you really want to use for success for your community affiliate? Is it the amount of dollars, right? So what a lot of people do, a lot of community foundations do, is they talk about the total dollars or asset value in their fund, the total earned down funds. These are all good numbers, and they're useful to know, and dollars are useful to have, but dollars telling you nothing about community transformation. What's different in our community because of those dollars? So when I think about measuring even fundraising, I think about what has stronger transformation potential in terms of where your your financial asset building will go. Is it the total dollars in your fund, or is it the number of donors, the number of new donors, the number of repeat donors, the number giving more, the diversity, location, the percentage of the population that gives? I know a community in Nebraska. I'm not making this up. In fact, Richard Walter, the chair of that community affiliate, came up to Alaska with me once and talked to the affiliates that you had at that point. 65% of the people in the community give to the community foundation. Can you imagine if that, maybe it's true in some of your affiliate regions, but think about the difference that would make if you could say 65% of our population gives to the community foundation. Notice these are all measures of participation. They're not measures of dollars. So what I would say is that in community development philanthropy, participation is probably your true endowment. How many different and how many repeat people are participating in different aspects of what we do, not just in the fundraising. And just like adding more board members, you just said, that makes a difference. Here's another great story that I think really illustrates this. This other community affiliate in Nebraska, this is a different one, was trying to begin to build their endowment. And, you know, the typical way, gets a few rich people and have an annual fundraising event, annual appeal. These are all good things. What these folks did is they created a founders campaign, and they basically went out and got a bunch of people who said they would commit $100 to the community foundation for life, to the unrestricted endowment, which could be split between unrestricted and operating. In 5 years, they had 284 people that became founders. Every school teacher in town was a founder, 11 confirmed planned gifts, endowment at 400,000, and they started making grants that made a difference. Entrepreneurship, youth development, and everyone knew about the community foundation and they considered it their foundation. Now, I will tell you, these stats are from probably 8-9 years ago. I now know that the downtown in that small town looks entirely different because of investments made by the community foundation, because they've been able to leverage more and more activity because they were so successful at the front end. This is the Pender Thurston Community Foundation in Nebraska. You can look them up. So I think participation as a design principle in everything you do, not just in your giving or in your endowment building or fund building, is really important. And I just want to have a couple more slides here to make a note on assets. Your assets are not just money. They include everything that can contribute to the well-being of people, places, or economies. And the way I like to talk about this is, if I threw this bag of money in the middle of a room, an empty room right today, and came back a year from now, it would still be the same bag of money. What turns it into something is all the other assets you have, right? Everything else that you can do and how you use it. It's about the impact that you make with that money, the change that happens in the community. And I will tell you, I have seen sometimes more happen with a well-invested $5,000 in terms of how it was used to make change happen in a community than a non-strategic $100,000. It's all in how you choose the issue, how you design the effort, and the leverage you achieve. And Bonnie Geddes, who runs a Barry Community Foundation in Barry County, Michigan, I love this quote: "If we are a community foundation, aren't we supposed to be creating a foundation for community?" Right? And this is totally in line with the definition that the community foundation field has come up with for community leadership, which is the movement within the community foundation field. That the community foundation is a partner that creates a better future for all, not just for some, by pursuing the community's greatest opportunities, addressing the most critical challenges. Are you addressing your community's most critical challenges? Inclusively uniting people, institutions, and resources from throughout to produce significant, widely shared, and lasting results. This is something to hold, to think about, how do we want to make more of a difference? And your community leadership roles go well beyond, as you know, building funds and grant making. It includes what you can do. These are your other assets that you can use to make change happen. You can convene people and organizations who don't talk to each other or who don't think together. You can do research, disseminate findings, build skills and knowledge, create collaboratives, assemble people to think about these problems together. You can negotiate, you can leverage. Remember how those in Chicago, they negotiated with the owners of the building that closed the clinic down? They just went and talked to them. You know, it wouldn't happen if hadn't done that. You can run programs yourself. You can advocate for change in policy, which we just heard one of your affiliates did. You really want to be asking yourself, how are we using our grant making, our partnerships, our community leadership, and our fund building to produce results that matter, to forge and fortify connections, ownership, and control, and build and leverage every asset we have. And the bottom line is, community is not the beneficiary of what you do, it's a solution to everything the community wants or needs. And you are about, in my view, community affiliates about assembling, right, the activity that has to happen for that solution to emerge. So I would say, why community development philanthropy? You know, has your affiliate had a what does success look like conversation, right? Or have you had that conversation? It's the cool thing to do. And I would say times are changing as you have determined yourselves or just reported yourself. What were you doing 5 years ago compared to what you're doing now, or 1 year ago? What will you do now to successfully improve prospects in your community 20 years from now, 10 years from now, as it says, 5 years from now, or this year? That's the question I want to leave you with. And then I'm going to stop the PowerPoint. And what I want to do now is turn to a couple other people who are here to hear some stories from them. Okay. And the first person is Ted Prina. Ted is the just past advisory board chair of the Gila Valley Community Affiliate of the Arizona Community Foundation. And I think Ted, you're here. I'm not sure I can see you right now, but I assume I'll see you.
I'm here.
There you are. Oh, there you are, Ted. I see you. I see your. I understand that you've done some different things in the last year, like grant writing workshops and professional advisors group and some weekly response grants during COVID. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, we do a grant cycle like every small community foundation does, I guess, everywhere. Ours is annual. We use it once a year. We use it as a marketing tool. In our small town, there's a certain number of people who run several boards. So growing a viable board becomes an issue. Well, we always reach out into the community to have new people on our grant selection committee. If you can see them, I mean, everybody likes to give money away. You know, that's the best part about what we do. If you can involve people in that, there's a natural place to have your board grow. We also, in our grant celebration, include all of the members from our community. We have our business leaders, our elected officials, all of those people gather around to celebrate the people who we're funding. We've also tied this to our volunteer of the year and our nonprofit of the year. Well, that brings another whole section of people who know those people who are getting the awards to our event. So in our little small town of 8,000, which I know we have a lot of towns that are involved in Alaska that are small, we end up with 200 or 300 people at our grant celebration. My wife usually does the food. They say they all come from food. But all of those people now know who we are. To develop our grant selection people, we actually go out into the community on our spring festivals or our county fair. We set up a trade show booth and sit and talk to people about who we are and what we do. We have learned that when you talk about scholarships, somehow lights go off. People like to talk about scholarships. They all have kids or grandkids who all need money with the cost of college. And all of a sudden, then you can talk about an endowment. For some reason, everybody thinks about a scholarship as being a perpetual fund. But endowment, the word is foreign. So it just plants those seeds. Another thing we've done in terms of grant making, the Arizona Community Foundation, I have to be careful here. We have 2 ACFs, you remember. We're the largest provider of scholarships in the state of Arizona, private provider of scholarships in the state of Arizona. So we have been able to get most of the schools to open their own alumni funds. One of our high schools has a large endowment, but when you make them compete a little bit with each other, all of a sudden now all of our high schools have their own alumni fund, and we're getting more kids to go to college. My family has a large scholarship fund. My uncles passed, and in 2015, we kicked off. And we had sizable dollars to give away in our community. We have about $80,000 in scholarships a year from the endowment. And we were finding out no kids were applying to scholarships. So in terms of collaboration, we see that as a big role of what we have to do in our communities, to gather different people from different groups and get them to work on a project. So we went to our local community college, and they were doing FAFSA workshops throughout the schools and the high schools. And we said, hey, we have this problem.
Workshops for financial aid, right?
Right, yeah, FAFSA. You have to do that in order to fill out, to get financial aid from the government, but also it's used on almost every scholarship application that you apply for, because most scholarships have some financial need attached to them. Well, long story short, we started Cash for College. It's a trade show type event where we get the parents involved with the students, because they're usually the driving force. Mom and dad are going to have to flip the bill for college. And we got United Way to give us some money to run the marketing campaign. We're on our 4th year. Many of our local scholarship people were also having not enough qualified applications. At least for my family scholarship, the first year we had 8 applications. This year we had 29. So, and we've had stories come back from our small scholarship holders that they now have many applications, and they've actually been able, many of them are like the Lions Club, they have a foundation above. They've been able to get more dollars from the other resources. So a lot of our kids are getting more money. It's just a win-win for everybody. And it was a great collaboration between United Way. Our United Way is funded basically by our copper mine. They run a dollar match program. So our United Way has lots of money. We're also one of the few community foundations that the United Way, and we work together. They have a fund with the Arizona Community Foundation. Lots of communities, they're considered to be a little competitive. By no means are we. And we work together on that. So between the college, our local scholarship people, our local United Way, we were able to do this, and we got lots of kids getting money for school, which is a good thing.
That's terrific. Actually, I know another community foundation that has now started, because, you know, in some rural places, scholarships are controversial because people think, well, we're funding kids to leave the community and they won't come back, right? Depending on what college they go to. So I know some community foundations now that have developed a reverse scholarship program where they're recruiting people to come back to town, and they'll pay off their student loan.
Good idea.
They're converting scholarship funds to reverse scholarship funds, so they will pay off the student loan of someone who comes, moves into the community, and gets a job. And they really like to get the young people that just got married, so they let them raise children there. And so we can route you to some of that. That's another good idea. Do you have one more example, Ted, of something?
Grant making, or well,
Well, yeah. What about these grant writing workshops? Those sounded pretty interesting.
Well, many of our nonprofits are small. You know, many of them are all volunteer organizations, not like the Boys and Girls Club in a big city where they've got these huge boards and they've got people to help with human resources and all that sort of stuff. So in order to fill out an application for our grant cycle, we've actually required our nonprofits to attend a grant writing workshop. And it sounds funny, but as a review committee, when you look at a budget, you know, it should equal 0, 0 on the bottom. You know how many don't? You know, you don't have a budget if it doesn't balance out your expenses and your income, right? So it's a chance for us to educate our nonprofits. We also have workshops that we host right in town on fundraising and how to maintain a donor list, and you know, if everybody that guy who donates $100 three times in a year or every 3 years or whatever, he's a potential legacy giver. The numbers show that. But many of our nonprofits are so busy with the day-to-day stuff. I'm sure as many of the affiliates in Alaska are the same. we're the people who can provide those services.
Thanks so much, Ted. I want to hear, we've got another, I think, good story from San Martinez, who's Special Projects Associate with the Whatcom Community Foundation in Bellingham, Washington, if I'm not mistaken, right? Ted, are you there?
Right, yeah.
You have a pretty interesting story about something you did differently in the last year, correct?
I do, yeah. Yeah, thank you for giving us space to talk about our recent work. Yeah, good to meet everyone. Sam Martinez with the Whatcom Community Foundation. We're based in Bellingham, Washington. So yeah, kind of your southern neighbors, although we're still pretty far away. But yeah, thanks for welcoming me on here. I'd like to share a little bit about our recent work in the food security world. I'd say that's a space that we've worked a lot in the past, but that has changed quite significantly during the pandemic and during the last year. So rewind to about a little more than a year ago, our city and county were launching their unified command response to the pandemic. And they asked us to step into the role of convening the food security work. And I wouldn't necessarily call that a surprise. I mean, we've had fairly strong connections with our local hunger relief organizations. We've worked with our local food banks. We have a donor advised fund that's very focused on local and sustainable agriculture. So we've worked with our local farms and farm support businesses. But being asked to step into this role in the way we were was pretty new for us. So basically for the last year, we've been convening our food security task force for the county, and that's between 30 and 40 organizations in the county across a whole spectrum of hunger relief organizations, farms, for-profit businesses, grocery stores, school districts, representatives from county and local government, basically anybody that's involved in some piece of the food supply chain has been involved in that task force, and we've been meeting pretty regularly. It started out, I'd say, a couple times a week, and then we've moved to more about monthly at this point. But bringing together this group to address the food security needs for the county. So, this was pretty new for us. We've worked a lot with the different audiences in that task force separately, but not necessarily together in the same way. So we brought together a lot of people from diverse backgrounds, and I think that collaboration and that chance to collaborate with folks that people don't normally work with has been one of the highlights that people have kept bringing up of this work. So I'd like to share a little bit, and hopefully you all can see my slides that are up right now about our Farm to Freezer program. So that's a program that emerged directly out of the food security task force that we were convening in response to the pandemic. So can you go to the next slide, please? So this was a collaboration between a few organizations in our county, the first being the Bellingham Food Bank, the second, the Bellingham Public Schools, that's our larger independent school district, their central kitchen staff, the third being Common Threads, which is a food education nonprofit in our county, and then the fourth being us, Whatcom Community Foundation, as the convener. And this happened, all of these organizations were participants in the food security task force, and this kind of came together as a collaboration between both the needs that people were seeing and the resources that people had that were going unused in our county. So our Bellingham Public Schools, they recently switched to a scratch cooking model for their school meals, which means they have this incredible new central kitchen with tons of storage and facilities and cooking facilities that was basically going unused because schools were closed during the beginning of the pandemic. And we had Bellingham Food Bank, who is obviously involved in food distribution and worked closely with our local farms in the county. And they were trying to figure out how to keep supporting our local farms who had maybe lost markets because the farmers market was closed or because restaurants were closed or things like that. There's all this excess produce in our community that we have to figure out an outlet for. and they have the infrastructure to distribute that, but how do you get from raw produce to something that you can distribute through a food bank model? And then we had Common Threads. They're a nonprofit that uses AmeriCorps volunteer or AmeriCorps staff. And normally in kind of traditional times, they do food education in schools. They work on school gardens, they work running school nutrition classes, things like that. But with that on hold due to COVID, they had a lot of AmeriCorps staff that were kind of in need of something to do. So those three organizations came together, and you can go to the next slide, please. So Bellingham Food Bank worked with our local farms, and they identified farmers who had excess produce. The chefs at the public schools worked together to create recipes based on that for soups, stews, and sauces. And then the chefs from the public schools and the Common Thread staff worked in the central kitchen. They processed all that extra produce and created frozen quarts of different soups and stews and sauces, all kinds of delicious recipes, packaged that, and then put it into cold storage. And Bellingham Food Bank has coordinated all of the distribution of that. And now, now that we're in 2021, that's all available for our local hunger relief organizations to actually distribute to their clients. So they can pick up different quarts of, a chicken cauliflower soup or a blackberry sauce or things like that, and they can distribute that to their clients. If you can go to the next slide, please. So yeah, as a community, we worked with 25 local farms. 7 of those were BIPOC owned. We worked with 29 AmeriCorps service members who actually participated in this project. And overall, we created more than 41,000 quarts of frozen soup, stews, and sauces that are available. That number's lower now because some of that's been distributed, but that'll go out over the next year to food bank and other hunger relief organization clients. We purchased more than $215,000 in produce from local farms, kind of produce that they wouldn't have been able to normally sell. And a bulk of that went to BIPOC farmers in terms of the purchase volume. And so that's all something, you're welcome to take those slides down now. That's all something that came out of just a collaboration that maybe wasn't seen before by those organizations, but came together as a result of our convening. So that's kind of an amazing example of the way that we can bring people together from a diverse audience and to see what they can create together.
So, I mean, the interesting thing is how many tools you used that were not just money, right? That would not have happened. You put together a whole circular economy system almost, and you could have given money to the food bank or something, which once again is a good thing to do. But what you did was say, who do we have locally that's depending on, that is growing food that is losing money, and how can we weave them into the thing? How can we weave these young AmeriCorps people into it? How do we weave the schools that are closed into it? So, I mean, that's the amazing thing. But it took someone to think that through, right? And
Right.
you did the convening of the whole group that were able to think it through together. So there are all kinds of participation measures in what you did as well, hearkening back to what I said earlier. Let's take, we're going to move on in a few minutes to talk to Natalie Ross from the Council on Foundations, but let's see if are there any questions that anyone wants to ask? You can put them in chat or just unmute yourself and ask. Let's just have a few minutes of questions. Anyone want to ask questions of Ted or Sam or me? Anything strike you at this moment? Don't be shy. Oh my gosh, is everyone asleep? Here's one. Is anyone doing the reverse scholarships in rural Alaska? I don't know. Is anybody? Just unmute yourself if you're doing it. Not yet, apparently. Thanks for the question. That was Robin Sherman.
Janet, I don't think anybody that we've heard of, and we partner with a lot of the Alaska Native regional corporations, are doing the reverse scholarship. It was the first time, so I appreciate the idea.
Yeah. Well, there's some good stuff out on it, and I'll send it to you. We've featured, I mean, the very first foundation that put it together, and the best expert on it is a guy named Randy Myers at the Community Foundation of St. Clair County in Michigan, which is in the thumb, right? For those of you who were paying attention earlier, Robin. Yeah, Robin likes to think about that. Okay, good. Other questions? Anyone else right now? All right. Once again, don't be shy. Okay. All right. Well, in that case, oh, wait, there is one. Oh, thank you, Janet. Okay, good. I'll take that. Oh, there's one more. Were there many legal administrative problems in Bellingham? Sam, did you have any legal problems?
No, there were no issues with that. The funding for this program actually came from the State Department of Agriculture. So it was state funding for this initial pilot phase. But we had no issues working with our State Department of Agriculture. And the funding went straight through Bellingham Food Bank, and they were able to make payments directly to farmers, and there were no issues there. So yeah, it all worked very smoothly.
You know, to add to that, I don't know if you guys are paying attention, but there are billions and billions of dollars that are come out of the federal government between the American Rescue Plan and the potential jobs, infrastructure, and American Family Plan. And that money is going to be going, they care a lot about rural. They've been doing all of these national, like, White House meetings, informing everyone about, we care about rural and we want to get this money to rural. And some of that money is going to be focused on ag and food systems. Some of that money is going to be focused on all kinds of different things. So I would pay attention to that, because you'll be able to pull some of that down, and there's not going to be any time like this. And the rescue plan, that money's already, it's already out there. I mean, it's committed. That's passed. The others are bills yet. But I say that because you mentioned that the state of Washington was part of this, and your states are going to be getting more money too. So it's a great time to think about being creative in partnership with your state government or the federal government. Reverse scholarships going to tech schools, no reason why they couldn't be. I mean, you know, it's just the whole scholarship thing with community foundations, which is a terrific thing. You know, some of them can be repurposed, or new ones can be set up for, you know, older people going back to school or training, getting new certifications. But a lot of scholarships are just set up for people going out of high school into college. And I think there's great possibility to be more creative with that and go back to some donors and say, hey, we have more need for this. We have more need for retraining. So let's get some of these scholarship dollars to do that. And they've done that in a few places. Definition of rural. You know it when you see it. That's my definition. The federal government has about, seriously, dozens of different definitions and different programs. So it's, you know, yes, a lot of money going to tribes as well. Right there. Well, there's the Census Bureau definition. I'm looking at chat. There's also the OMB definition, and they're different. One of them has 14 million people living in rural. One of them has 20 million people living in rural. 21. Take your pick. That's the last census, not the current one. All right. So the chat stuff is good. Katie Vincent has put in a definition. There you go. Oh, she's got a lot of that in there. It's getting it gets very complex, but there'll be different definitions in different federal programs, basically, depending on which one it is. Well, let's turn then to Natalie. Natalie Ross is the Vice President of Strategic Development and Opportunities at the Council on Foundations. And I think she's going to share with us some things that they've done some research on the changes in foundation grant making that have happened partly because of COVID, and I would say also because of racial reckoning going on in this country. So Natalie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Janet. And it's been so wonderful to hear the examples so far from across the country and across Alaska of how foundations and affiliates especially are responding to COVID. So we were asked to share from the council's perspective, kind of what have we seen for how U.S. foundations have responded to COVID. And so there's a number of things I thought I could highlight. As you all may or may not know, the Council is a national network of grant-making organizations, over 800 foundations from all 50 states. We are 70 years old, and overall our North Star is that we work to help philanthropy be a more trusted partner in advancing the greater good. And about 40% of our network are community foundations from across the country. So when all of you in Alaska are thinking about your vision for where you go from here, and the work that you're doing in your communities, there's a lot of lessons learned from this unprecedented year that we've all gone through. And it was great to hear your reflections on that already to start this session. So if you go to the next slide, when we think about the scale of the foundation response to COVID, Candid is a national foundation data partner, if we can move forward. And they tracked $20.2 billion globally in funding that has been given in 2020 related to COVID. And importantly, when we look at that data, 54% of the grants, the individual grants made in that large amount of money were made by community foundations. Their data tracked that in all 50 states, there were more than 1,000 total funds hosted, many of them by community foundations, that really enabled responsiveness of philanthropy to support communities and local needs, like we've already heard here today. 35% of that was for BIPOC communities, and that includes 29% of the grants for COVID from community foundations in 2020 were to support BIPOC communities. So we'll keep moving and we'll see where the slides come. Let me know if I should share my screen. I can do that as well. So one thing that the council did as a national network as the pandemic was hitting was we partnered with a number of foundations to launch a pledge. It was launched in 2020 and now has over 800 signatories from across the United States of grant-making institutions that are committing to doing their work in a different way in light of the needs in different communities. So many of the things that were pledged by these grant makers, including 239 community foundations across the country, were about trust-based philanthropy. And so there's a lot in what Janet shared that's similar, the idea of participation and really being partners. So go ahead and move to the next slide and we'll share this data hopefully afterwards so you can see it. Perfect. So when we think about the pledge, there were a number of commitments about loosening restrictions, reducing requirements, making sure to fund the communities most impacted, and especially listening to communities. And as we heard examples, supporting advocacy and public policy. So this pledge has been live for over a year. And the number one question I get is, did it work? Did people change what they were doing because they signed a pledge or not? And how has the grant-making practice of US foundations changed in light of COVID? So we have two studies that have come out in the last 6 months that have really tried to answer this question. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of what we do think has changed from initial research, what we think hasn't changed from all the data that we've seen, and then what seems to be likely to perhaps stay changed and what might snap back to the practices that we used to see. So if we go to the next slide, last year, the council partnered with Dahlberg and Philanthropy California. If we can scoot back one, and we really researched foundations to look at how they are shifting their resources, their priorities, and their internal operations. And so we saw that things are changing. 60% of the foundations studied are increasing their giving, and those who are increasing, it's by an amount of about 17% in order to meet increased need. For those with endowments, their increase of giving may be because of an increase in payout. For others, it's because of the ability to raise funds in COVID funds that they're now able to get out the door to their community. And some, 67%, are thinking about mission-related investments and what they're doing with their endowments as part of their thinking around resources. When you think about priorities and What are we funding? We saw that about a quarter did move to do more rapid response in relation to COVID. Interestingly, less than a third of those grants were for healthcare. So there was a broader focus on economic recovery, community building, and a focus on racial equity. And we did see a small percentage say that they've now moved, that about 11% say racial equity is now key to their work. And that's a change for them from in the past. And then importantly, we wanted to understand how have the ways of working changed within your organization. And this really links to the pledge. So over 80% adopted more flexibility, about 30% also started doing more beyond the check work. So beyond the grant, what are they doing to support grantees, like some of the examples that we heard from Arizona, and then also adjusting operations to support their staff, just to make sure that everyone's able to work through the pandemic. So from this research, things are changing. But if you go to the next slide, we also saw that there are certain things not changing. And our overall findings were that there's more to be done if we really, as a sector, want to share power with the communities we work with and the organizations that we fund. So only about 20%, as we said, are looking at investment practices. So leveraging that other 95% of their work. And there did seem to be lots of questions about whether you should increase your payout, whether you should give more money in this time, or if you should reserve resources to fund other challenges that are coming down the road. So there are still questions and resources and how much should go out the door. Is when we look at priorities, although 60% did report a focus on Black communities, many said that their internal policies and frameworks for racial equity are still lacking, and they still have work to do to understand how over the long term they change their ways of working. And many reported they continue to have a lack of diversity in their leadership and their staff or their board, and that there are also sometimes just not as much desire to shift to think about racial equity in the way that they want to. And so that's overall both in priorities and in internal operations. There are people thinking about it, but not necessarily yet delegating decision-making in different ways to share power. And finally, there was only a very small number that have really committed to hiring more BIPOC staff within their foundations. So from this study, there was a lot of good things that have changed and other things that haven't. And we really found that that was connected to these questions about power and how are we shifting decision-making and what does that look like? So if we go to the next slide, a second study was done by the Center for Effective Philanthropy, also at the end of last year, that specifically surveyed pledge signatories and a comparable group of foundations who didn't sign the pledge to understand what has changed and what hasn't changed. So what has changed? Restrictions being reduced, being loosened, less is being asked, more grants are becoming unrestricted. And so you can see that 57% have started making more unrestricted grants than before the pandemic, which is great. And so there's just real changes in some of those core elements of the pledge that we saw with this set of foundations. If we want another finding beneath this, beneath both of these slides, so this one as well, is that when looking at the diversity of the board, if the board was more diverse, the foundation was more likely to have made these changes. And so that's an interesting connection from the first study to the second. When we look at which foundations have loosened grant restrictions, these are the types of restrictions that were loosened. So were grantees held responsible for missing grant terms? Could they convert funding to unrestricted? Could they, did they do that automatically, or did they offer it to them? Did they accelerate how money was getting out the door to help? And then where does it look like in unrestricted? And so you can see that there is change happening, a lot of it linked to the commitments that were made. And we did see that foundations who signed the pledge were more likely to have made these changes than foundations who didn't. And interestingly, when we look at pledge signatories, they do tend to be smaller than, they're not necessarily the large foundations you would think of from all types, whether that's corporate or private or community foundations. We saw many small foundations making really large commitments to change their practice. So if you move to the next slide, there's a real question of what's not changing. And from this CEP report, one of the biggest things not changing was about multi-year multi-year unrestricted support. And so for many, that is a real indicator of trust with grantees, is that not only are you giving unrestricted grants so that can be used in whatever way the nonprofit partner thinks it's needed, you're doing that with multi-year commitments. So they have reliable revenue that they can count on. And we see that 72% of foundations are not doing more multi-year unrestricted grants, and 10% are actually doing less. And so this is an area where there's a real question of what will change. So if you go to my last slide, I think the question, as I said, that we get asked the most at the council is what practices might remain changed post-COVID. According to our surveys and the research, the practices most likely to remain changed are loosening restrictions, reducing asks of grantees, and making new, especially single-year grants, as unrestricted as possible. Beyond that, I think what we see across this, and it really aligns with everything we've heard today, is a real attention to trust-based grant-making practices. That includes attention to participatory approaches. How are we involving the voice and input of the communities that we're aiming to serve, both in our grant-making practice and then also as we think about our staff internally and our board leadership. And similarly, how are we as philanthropic institutions considering and addressing the power dynamics that we have with the partners that we're serving and with our community. And so in the work that we do with community foundations across the country, there are so many powerful examples of how community foundations have made changes to their work, whether they've created new grant selection committees to help distribute COVID funds, to make them more participatory and reflective of the groups they're trying to serve, and how they've had really powerful partnerships that didn't exist pre-COVID. And so what we see is a hope, and what we hope, I will say, is for many of these practices to continue, because for us, that's how philanthropy remains and becomes more trusted in the communities and partners that it serves, when there are these better strengthened relationships. So with that, I'll stop with the slides, but happy to be in conversation, take questions, etc.
Great. Let's see if there are a few questions specifically for you, and then we'll open it up for any discussion or conversation. Chris Narose asked, Natalie, are you seeing more multi-year grant making so as to allow for innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes, yes, that absolutely allows for innovation. I think for a lot of the calls for multi-year grant making are though truly just to allow for stability, for nonprofits to have the knowledge that they will have resources to count on for multiple years in order to plan ahead. Does that enable innovation? I would say yes. Absolutely, because you're able to take more risks as you have the runway of work that you know will be there and gives you more time to try new things and do things differently. But when I see the calls, it's mostly a call from grantee partners and nonprofits across the country for that reliable revenue, which is incredibly important at a time where nonprofits are very concerned about their budgets, as you all likely hear in your communities, and how they've been so impacted by COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that and I put this in the chat, but there's a lot of not just anecdotal, but actual research that shows that especially nonprofits in smaller places, smaller cities, smaller towns, and rural places, you know, the unrestricted dollars that allow you that predictability, as you said. If you don't know where your salaries are coming from more than 6 months ahead of time, you spend all your time raising that salary as opposed to doing the work that your nonprofit really is trying to do. If you can, I mean, that's why a lot of community foundations like to help the nonprofits grow endowment, agency endowment or nonprofit endowment that will allow them some money that they know is predictable. But really that can come through your grant making too for really critical nonprofits. Multi-year, you know you're going to get this much, right? And therefore you're not spending all your time raising money instead of doing the work. And I would stop counting the number of rural nonprofits I know around the country that spend too much time raising money.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think we have another question. stability and reduction. Robin, who is very vocal in chat. Thank you, Robin. Stability and reduction in administrative burden. Applying for grants is a lot of work. Robin, you want to talk about that a little bit? You put a lot in chat. What is it you want to say out loud, Robin? There must be something. Where's Robin?
I'm actually just as happy to write. But one of the things that I find both in my role with Alaska Community Foundation and in another role in the community is that some of the small organizations need the money and they know it's there. They just don't have somebody who can get to writing the grant application. And I don't always know how to deal with that burden, but I think that the possibility of multi-year funding commitments or a really simplified process might result in more applications from different organizations that we don't necessarily hear from.
Yeah, I think that Ted, gave us an example of what they did in the Gila Valley, where they actually had grant writing required workshops. So if you want to apply, you got to come to this workshop, and they actually helped walk them through the grant writing process. I also know some community foundations that have changed their grant application to more of a questionnaire that people answer, and then they do an interview instead of having it be quite as ponderous as some are. Now, yours may not be ponderous, so I'm not casting any aspersions here, but I know some grant application processes that are not easy. And so part of it is how do you walk with people through your process as opposed to making it a barrier to them coming to you for what they need? Right?
Yeah, I would add to that, Janet. One thing we've heard during the pandemic is we've had members asking for examples from other foundations of if they've transitioned away from written applications and written reports to video and just phone check-ins to then the foundation staff can take notes and submit them as needed. But it takes the burden entirely off the nonprofits to even have a staff person. There's just a conversation check-in or a video call, and then that serves as really the documentation that's needed to track progress against the grants. And one thing we talk a lot about at the council, people come to us and ask, well, what is required? What is the compliance requirement from the IRS or from Treasury? We do a lot of legal questions, and many of our members are surprised at the things that are just common practice within foundations, but are not legally required in regulations around philanthropy. There are legal requirements, but some of the things you think are required may actually just be things that you've always done as an organization. And so when we look at the restrictions released or the flexibility given in the last year because of COVID, it has often challenged organizations to question some of those own norms that they've created as their own processes and systems, and staff may even expect are required by law, but actually are not.
Right. I mean, there's this is the way we've always done it problem, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I mean, I think community foundations are specifically victim to this, because usually in any one place, there's only one community foundation. So you don't necessarily look at how are other people doing it in our place, because there's only one of you in your place, right? It's not like, how is the coffee shop down the block doing their lattes versus how are we doing ours, or how are they doing their, how are they grilling their burgers compared to where we are, because there's only one of you. So this is great because you get to talk to each other here and see how you're doing things differently, and you really should learn from each other. But that's an important thing. I mean, I've run into a lot of around the country, a lot of people say, well, we can't do that as a community foundation. And I instead say, no, you can, because community foundations are the most flexible form of nonprofit in the United States. You have a wider set of tools than anyone. You can grow funds, you can set up funds, you can work with donors, you can make grants, you can convene, you can do all these things. You can, there are lots of community foundations now doing business lending, right? I'm not saying you have to, but there are. And I remember 30 years ago, everyone said you couldn't, and now it's becoming the thing. And they're doing it out of grant making money, or they're raising special money for it, or they're using government money, or sometimes they invest out of their endowment investment portfolio. So there are lots of different things that can be done now that didn't used to be done. So don't get stuck in the we don't do that, or we can't do that, because probably you can figure out a way to do it. There's another question here. Is COVID taking its toll on the number of nonprofits? Are any of the survivors working together by consolidating missions? Does anyone have an example of that in your community? Have you had nonprofits close, or have you seen any join up forces? Anyone? Including Ted or Sam, have you seen any of that? Ted saying no. Sam, what do you got?
For us, we're kind of in that, the first year there were a lot of resources out there, or there was a lot of scrambling, kind of depending on where you ended up on that spectrum. But there's a lot of people who either in that first year of COVID kind of figured out how to adapt their mission or kind of move funds around, or, a lot of our nonprofits actually got more funding than normal because of CARES funding flowing in. And now we're at this point where, okay, everybody's seeing increased levels of service or increased things that they're having to respond to. And the attention, both government dollars and donor dollars is down. So I think this next year is really where we're going to start seeing people, who made it through that first year, but now are trying to figure out how to adapt. So that's something that we're paying attention to.
And Ron, in a way, asked that. Ron, have you seen that in your community? Are you there, Ron?
Yeah, I haven't seen it directly. I know that there are lots of nonprofits, and many of them don't really know what they're doing. That's our real concern, particularly just doing the routine reporting that should be required. But I'm really concerned about the focus on COVID right now, sort of shifting the focus. And I don't know what's going to happen to the other nonprofits who are in the community. We are having a certain population drain from certain sectors of the economy. And I think that's going to be another kind of consideration for different kinds of nonprofits.
I mean, that's an example of something you could, as a community affiliate, find out about. You could do a survey of nonprofits about what do they see as their greatest opportunities or challenges, or you could start having little, after social distancing or as social distancing, little, when the weather is better, you could have little backyard conversations about what do we see. I mean, that's part of it. I mean, I remember one community foundation that used to make a habit of having going to every town in their region. They had an 11 county region, but they would have coffee in every town in their region, a morning coffee. Anyone could come in and just talk to them about what's going on in the community, so that they hit every town once every 2 years. They had lots of towns. You let people know. So there's what you're suspecting, Ron, may be the case, but you'll know better if you start talking to them sort of in a little more organized way, or deploy your affiliate board to do that, the whole board.
Maybe Janet answer the question from a Foraker Group board member perspective, and Chris can share as well. But I think Foraker would say we're not seeing consolidation at the same level as we were expecting, because exactly the trends that Sam mentioned, the $50 million that got infused into the nonprofit sector in 2020 was significant, and actually provided more funding than most organizations were used to year over year. And the question will be what happens in 2021, because I think that will be the potential funding cliff. But I would say that the one sector that would be interesting to look at from a local community foundation point of view, and certainly from a ACF point of view as well, is the arts sector has been very challenged. They have not gotten the same funding. And so they really are coming together. The symphony and the orchestra and the opera have been sworn enemies in Anchorage for, I can't remember how many years, but they're coming together now and saying, there's some common part of our mission, and there's some common part of what we do, and we've got to be collaborative or we're all going to go away. And so it's actually creating maybe not consolidation, but collaboration.
Well, that's a silver lining for sure. And we need as many as we can out of what we've all been through and are going through right now. So we have a question. There seems to be a focus on funding programs that are sustainable or are moving towards sustainability. Are we moving away from these type of lenses, or do you think that remains? I mean, I think that remains personally. But my sense is what makes an organization sustainable, right? And that is a real question. You know, what do you need in order to have the capacity to sustain yourselves over time? I mean, you need thinking. You also need, as I think we've said, some dedicated staff, right? There are lots of organizations who the people who are hired to direct them, who have all the content knowledge, end up spending all their time raising money instead of doing their work, the content work. It's a real problem. So what do you need? I mean, anyone else have an answer to Amy's question? It's a good question. You know, do you think people are still looking? You know, I think maybe Amy, you can comment on this. Is there something underneath your question that basically saying we should be funding the strongest organizations? Is that what you're saying, Amy? Or
no, I was just talking about in our community, we have a lot of small nonprofits that are all volunteer based, and often as grant makers, it seems like boards are looking at these programs that they're offering to work and put out like, okay, well, guess we could fund them this year, but maybe not next year or the year after, because they keep coming back with the same program and asking SEF to participate. So I was just asking that question because some of these programs are really awesome, and maybe they're not sustainable, but they have a lot of value in our community. And that's where my question is coming from when we talk about multi-year funding.
Yeah, I can think of one foundation in rural community. When they faced this, they had a very interesting thing. They said, you come back to us for this every year, and you know there are other needs in the community, so we'll give you half of what we gave you last year if you raise the other half. So what they did was create a challenge for that organization to stop relying on the community foundation as their only source. That way, if they go find other donors, they become more sustainable, and you freed up half of what you gave them to do something else with. So that, I mean, you know, I mean, I really realize it runs counter to then saying, then they have to go out and raise money, but at the same time, they get more support. So it's a slippery, you know, it's a trick. It's a balance, I think. Anyone else have an answer to that? And we've got another. So Gail, you wrote a very long text. Let's see. Gail, why don't you just tell us the story as opposed to having us all read it? Would
Not
you?
a question, just to thank you. I just wanted to thank you for everything you've shared, because I've been part of a coalition in Cordova long before I was part of CCF. And basically we just had a really nice lunch together once a month. And now it's started in the last year, has just become this group that's actually trying to figure out what each other does and what needs they're serving and how they're funding it. And I think I just see so much hope in all of the things that you all have shared. I'm excited to go back. We meet on Thursday next week. I'm going to share a lot. Thank you.
You know, Gail, you raised something that I've seen happen so many times. So you had been meeting, so you had relationships, but when there's a crisis, you find out what everyone actually does, right? I cannot tell you how many stories I've heard this year about, well, we knew these people and their friends, and, you know, we go to the kids, same school, but they didn't really know what each other did professionally, other than they could say, oh, they work at that organization, right? They didn't really know what the work was. And now people have learned, I mean, sort of like the story Sam told, they all found out they had something that could be put together into this bigger thing by talking to each other, not just about, you know, the price of coffee, but, you know, what are we all doing? And that's but crisis makes you do that. What can I bring to the table, right? And how can we then weave that into a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts? Any other questions at this point about anybody or comments? No? So, Michelle Han Cordova raised hand. So where is this person?
I'm
Go.
hiding somewhere on the screen, I'm sure. My question, I'm still stuck. I've loved this presentation. It's been fabulous. I'm still stuck back, Janet, on your slide, which I absolutely love, about the transformation from the immediate food to the food bank, towards more sustainability, towards eradicating the problem that creates the food shortage. And my questions are all about, it's a lot for me to grasp all at once, but I think it's the vital key, and something we've been trying to figure out within our organization is, how do you make that transformation to big picture while also helping to keep food in the food bank in the immediate need? And currently, so one of the things we go through is, do we save money for larger projects, or we get hit by like $200, $300 infinite donations, and we have very limited money to give at this point in time? So making that transformation to creating that very healthy, very functioning community is our main goal, without a doubt. But then the immediate needs are also real. Any thoughts on making the transformation?
I have one thought on that. And by the way, that slide always gets somebody, at least, right? It's a very deceptively simple, but it makes people think. So who are the people going? So let's take exactly that example, something that you do that you have to do repetitively, that is a problem, right? And figure out a way that you can talk to the people who are going to the food bank and ask them, what is standing in your way of doing better? Now, not everybody will be that, but there's a designed principle in all of this, that if you really are going to make change happen, don't assume you know what the barrier is that has to be gotten over. So I'll talk to you about not a community foundation, but a community action agency I know in Wisconsin. It was trying to help low-income people get ahead, because community action agencies, they help with all kinds of routing federal dollars for low-income heating and all kinds of things. And what they did, they started talking to people. They realized a lot of people were not getting ahead just because they didn't have a car, which of course is important rural. And they cobbled together a really interesting program that got low-income mothers on TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, into reliable, low mileage cars. And they bought the cars. They created a car dealership, if you can believe it. They got cars that meet the criteria at an auction, and then they figured out how to use TANF dollars through a pilot program and other charitable funds to get these people into these cars. And actually they paid off part of the loan, so they built their credit history, and then they studied it a few years later. And the families did better. They got better jobs. They did this, that, and the other, because they got people in cars. So you assume that, let's give these people job training. Well, that may not be the issue in this case. You can have all the job training in the world. If I can't get to it or can't get to the job, I can't get there. But they found that out by talking to the people, right? What is the next? It's human-centered design. If you're trying to help people, talk to them about what the barrier and the opportunity is. Don't assume you know. And we do a lot of grant making and giving, charitable giving in this world, telling people that we know how to solve their problem, right? People are the experts in their own lives. We are not. You have to really talk to the organizations or the people or whoever it is. And so you set aside maybe, 10% of your grant making or 20% of your grant making for one strategic thing a year. Or you say, this year we want to look at this issue, and we're going to talk to a few people about it, and we're going to do grant making around this issue. I mean, I know foundations that will set a 5-year priority. We're going to work on childcare for 5 years, and they'll spend the first year studying it, and then they set the money aside, and then they make a bigger bet on something that's really critical. That's the community leadership thing. What's the most critical issue, right? So that's my thought, is don't ever assume that you know the solution. Talk to the people who are the experts in the problem. And those are the people who have them, right? I would like to end with one thing, and I'm going to share my screen again for just a moment. And I want you all to use chat now. And this is the question. We've been together now for an hour and 45 minutes almost. What sticks with you that you want to remember when you define success for your affiliate's next phase? And just think about that. And if all of you who feel comfortable, but as many of you as possible, just write what that is in the chat box. And I think the foundation will record this and remind you of it later. But what is the thing that you want to remember that you heard, or it could be just a realization you had that you want to remember when you work with your affiliate to define success or your next strategy? Let's see what happens. I'm going to stop sharing again so I can look at the chat. Oh, come on, more of you. Or maybe everyone's writing long paragraphs or something. Power your community by listening. Go upstream. Participation, not just money. All right, transitioning to the upside down pyramid. We've got a lot going on here. That's good. Long-term problems, not short-term solutions. There you go. I'd keep them coming. The chat will not close. I want to thank you all for inviting me. I want to thank Ted, and I want to thank Sam for sharing your stories and your ideas. I want to thank Natalie. I want to thank everyone at the great Alaska Community Foundation for letting us be here with you today. I admire everything you're doing, and I know you're going to do great. I meant to say to Ted, I was down in Arizona when they started the affiliate program down there, helped them start the affiliate program. So I knew a lot of people who were maybe there before your time. Steve Mendenthal, I knew really well when he ran the Community Foundation. And it really
done very, very well. We went on a roadmap about 5 years ago to become completely sustainable.
Yep.
And we are. We pay for ourselves. We pay for our offices. We pay for our staff. It's wonderful.
Great. Good to have you. Good to hear from everyone. And I'm going to sign off. Anything else, Marco or sorry, Nina? Anything else you want before I sign off?
We just have Carmen who's going to give us a reminder.
All right, good.
Before Carmen gives a reminder, can I just say a very big thank you to Janet for hosting this session, Janet for engaging us all in this conversation. We do find great value in all of our panelists for the great ideas that you bring and sharing them with all of those that are trying to learn and grow in Alaska. So thank you.
What's next? Or do I sign off, or is everyone staying on, Marco? I don't know. I have to go, so I'll see you. Bye bye.
Janet, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Our next session is going to start at 3 o'clock, which is the fundraising. And you're welcome to sign on at 2:45 on. But just to let you know that there is a party tonight that starts at 5:15. It's an awards party. And we really encourage you to wear goofy glasses, wear glitz, wear bling, wear your wackiest hat. If you have a tiara or a crown, wear it. Just bring your fun. We're gonna have live music and we really hope to see you there. It starts at 5:15. And again, our next session is fundraising at 3. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.